Hi, good evening everyone. Welcome to BCRC's webinar on boosting the calf crop percentage in beef herds. My name is Tracy Sakatch and I'll be the moderator for tonight's webinar. I work for the Beef Cattle Research Council as the Extension Coordinator, which means that I have the very cool job of helping to share information between researchers and industry experts and beef producers in all kinds of different ways, including webinars. It's a pleasure to see so many people across Canada registered for tonight's webinar. Last count we had 224 people registered representing British Columbia, Prince Edward Island, and every single province in between. Nearly 80% of you identified yourselves as cattle producers, and the other 20% of the audience is a fairly even split between those other groups that you saw when you registered, such as folks who work for industry, agribusiness, or government. So welcome to each of you. If you're a producer that started your calving season, we certainly hope that's going well for you and continues to go smoothly, and best of luck in bull sale season. So as you know, we are recording tonight's session, and we'll post the video on our website for anyone to view at a later time. You'll receive a link to this video in your email in a couple of days, so you can watch it again later. I also encourage you to take some notes tonight because taking notes will just help you to remember some more of the information. So a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. So of course you can hear and see me right now. You'll be able to hear and see the other presenters this evening, but we can't hear you or see you for that matter. So if you want to communicate with us, you need to type in the box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you have any questions or comments for either of the presenters, that's the place to do it. And feel free to send in questions anytime throughout tonight's webinar. We'll answer all the questions near the end of the hour. And later in the webinar, we'll have some questions for you. There'll be multiple choice questions, and you'll click on the answer. But just know that those answers are completely anonymous. We can't attribute any of the answers to anyone. So here's what we'll be covering tonight. So first you'll hear an overview of who the BCRC is, the Beef Cattle Research Council, what checkoff dollars pay for, and an explanation of Canada's beef cattle industry science clusters. Then we'll get into how to achieve reproductive goals, avoid wrecks, and capitalize on that momentum. Then we'll open it up to questions from you. And, oops. Jumped ahead a bit here. Open it up to questions from you, and then we'll end the webinar by letting you know where to find more information on tonight's topic and how to be sure that you hear about future BCRC webinars. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker this evening, Dr. Reynold Bergen. Oh, sorry about this. Okay. So Reynold is the Science Director at the Beef Cattle Research Council. As the Science Director, he is our go-to guy on just about all things science-based and research-related. He's got a real passion for our beef industry and has great skill at explaining science in an understandable and usually a pretty entertaining way as well. If you received the Canadian Cattlemen's magazine, you likely recognize him from the research column that he writes in each issue. So you can take it away, Reynold.
Right on, Tracy. Passion on the internet. I never thought it would happen to me. Okay, I'm going to give a really quick rundown on the BCRC. I'm pretty sure this will be a review for hopefully most of you, but likely new for some of you. So the Beef Cattle Research Council, or the BCRC, who both Tracy and myself work for. You can hear me, right, Tracy?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Our mandate, our job is to fund research that will contribute to the competitiveness and sustainability of Canada's beef cattle industry. We've been around since the late 1990s, and we're funded through the national checkoff. Each provincial beef group, so Alberta Beef Producers here, BC Cattlemen's, Saskatchewan Cattlemen's, Manitoba Beef, Ontario Beef, or Beef Farmers of Ontario, Nova Scotia Cattlemen's, and so on. Each of those groups decide how to allocate that checkoff between research and marketing. and so it varies from province to province. Each of those provinces also nominates producer representatives to sit on the BCRC, and those are the individuals who actually decide what gets funded and what isn't. And one of the things that we do is make a really big effort to make sure that each of the producer dollars that comes into us gets leveraged as highly as possible against other funders, so typically government dollars, so that we can use each producer dollar to maybe get $6 or $7 worth of research underway. How do I make this go? Okay, so most provinces have a $3 checkoff. Some have 2, most have 3, and that's actually 2 different checkoffs. There's a provincial checkoff that funds provincial activities like advocacy or lobbying, policy development, research, marketing, promotion, and that sort of thing. And that provincial checkoff dollar also funds the CCA, and so that goes towards national and international advocacy and lobbying, dealing with trade issues, dealing with legal issues, dealing with policy, and that sort of thing. So things like the RCAF battles of the previous few years, the current ongoing COOL dispute, European Free Trade, Trans-Pacific Partnership, those are all activities that the CCA undertakes, but those are all funded through the provincial checkoff, actually, that's forwarded onto the CCA. The national checkoff is a totally different ballgame. The national checkoff is used for 2 things. It's used for marketing and promotion activities through Canada Beef Inc., and it's also used to fund research activities through the BCRC. The national checkoff doesn't fund the CCA. The CCA is funded through the provincial checkoff, so that's interesting. So I talked the last couple of years, we've been working pretty closely with the federal government and with other funders, including Alberta beef producers, on something called the Beef Science Cluster. And the idea here is that leverage thing that I was referring to earlier, where we try to take each checkoff dollar for research and turn that into 6 and 7 research dollars using other funds. And so the idea here is that all of these groups have a mandate to support industry competitiveness through applied beef research. And if we can all pool our funds, and work together, we can probably all move further ahead and faster. So the first beef cluster ended on March 31st of 2013, and we've been doing a fair bit of research over the last few months through this website, beefresearch.ca. On some of the research results that came out of that cluster. The second beef cluster is underway now, and so stay tuned for some of the work that we're going to be supporting over the next 5 years or so. Now the second cluster, and based on the successes of the first one, actually, the second beef cluster has attracted a lot of interest and additional funding from a wide variety of other industry and government funders across the country, and so we're pretty excited about that. Now, one of the projects that'll be going under this second cluster is being led by Dr. John Campbell at the Western Vet College, or Western College of Veterinary Medicine. And this project is going to be setting up a network of producer herds that'll be kind of a living laboratory or a resource about the sort of production management, animal health issues that these operations are experiencing, and what sort of routine production, animal health, and other practices they typically follow. So John's going to be speaking to us tonight about how optimizing reproductive performance is largely hinged on also optimizing animal health and nutritional management. And so the idea for this specific webinar actually kind of grew out of the Saskatchewan Beef Industry Conference about a month ago in the 3rd week of January, and a bunch of us got together for a really impromptu meeting there of producers and vets and researchers to discuss some concerns that have been bubbling up around the perception that reproductive performance has possibly been dropping over the last few years. There's a lot of producer interest at that meeting, and while the reasons for reproductive performance drops may likely vary from operation to operation on kind of a case-by-case basis, we felt that a webinar on this topic would be a really obvious and timely thing for the BCRC to host. So with that, I'm going to turn the reins back over to Tracy.
Thank you, Reynold. So again, if anyone has any questions for Reynold at all, please feel free to type them in that chat box, and he'll be happy to answer them near the end of the webinar. So now I'll introduce Dr. John Campbell. Dr. Campbell is a veterinarian that works with cow-calf producers and feedlot clients in the Saskatoon area. He's a professor at the Western College of Veterinary Medicine, and he's a researcher with particular interest in herd health and reproductive issues. He's been involved in helping to achieve a number of important industry goals, including the development of the Beef Code of Practice. So please welcome John.
Thank you, Tracy. I hope everybody can see me. I got to share my screen here first. And hopefully you can all see that as well. Sorry, I'm just having some technical difficulties here, but I hope everyone can see that all right and that my screen's showing up properly for you. So this is a really weird experience talking to my computer in my office at 8 o'clock at night, and I just want to thank BCRC for the opportunity and for the first chance to try this. We'll be seeing how it goes and seeing if we can make this work. But it is kind of weird talking to the computer, and I wondered if I could do it in my house coat, but then Tracy said I had to use the webcam, so here we go. So hopefully we don't have any technical glitches, and feel free to try to ask questions. We'll try to answer some of them. We had some really good questions in advance of the seminar, and my talk today is kind of more general reproduction. We had some really good specific questions on things like estrus synchronization and bull-cow ratios and things like that. I'm going to focus mostly on general reproduction and the association with nutrition and a little bit of reproductive math, which sounds really boring, but hopefully I can get it across without putting everybody to sleep. It's actually based on a talk that I heard from Bob Larson at Kansas State. Dr. Larson's a veterinarian at Kansas State who's a brilliant guy, and he gave a talk somewhat similar to this. I've modified it quite a bit, but talking about reproductive momentum, and I want to give him credit because I'm not sure it's really my original idea, but it was a very good presentation. So with that, let's get going. I want to talk about profitability criteria for the cow-calf herd, and it's really pretty simple. There's really only 4 things we can do to change the profitability. One is we can change our calf crop percentages. We can sell more calves or more pounds of calves at the end of the day. So, and by calf crop, we're always talking about the number of calves weaned per cow exposed to the bull. So there's lots of things that can affect calf crop percentage, abortions and calves dying and neonatal mortality and things like that, but it's certainly a very important aspect of profitability. We can increase the pounds of calf we sell by the weaning weights of the calves. We can change the selling price of the calves, and we don't have a lot of control over that, and we've finally got some good years here in front of us, it looks like. Hopefully that continues on. We might be able to improve that by marketing or other strategies, and then finally we can change the annual cow costs or the cost of production. And certainly cost of production is a pretty important part of this, and we focused on that a lot in the last few years, trying to decrease cow costs and making sure that we have minimal cow costs but still achieving maximum production. And so we got to keep that in the back of the mind throughout this whole talk, that cow costs are important. We can't ignore that, but we probably can't sacrifice reproduction too much when we're reducing cow costs because it's so important. If we don't have a calf at the end of the day, we've got nothing to sell. And the old adage, you know, reproduction is 5 times more important than growth rate, and it's 10 times more important than carcass quality, sort of goes to that fact. It's kind of an old rubric, but it really is true that if you don't have a calf to sell, you know, a small calf's better than no calf, and a calf with a poor carcass is still better than no calf as well. So it's important. It's an important aspect of the profitability equation. Well, we have some reproductive goals, and this is my list of reproductive goals. I have 4 major ones. I want a high percentage of my cows pregnant, so I want a good calving percentage, or a good percentage of the cows calving. I'd like close to 95%. Certainly that would be be an achievable goal in many circumstances. And then I want to front load the breeding season. I'd really like 65% of those cows bred in the first heat cycle so that they're going to calve in the first 21 to 30 days of the calving season. And ultimately that gives you heavier calves, and I'll show you more on that in a minute. We'd also like a uniform calf crop, so a short breeding season. Usually the textbooks say 42 to 45 days for heifers and 63 days for cows. I'm not sure we always have to be at that level, but that's often listed as sort of optimal in many of the textbooks on beef cattle production. And then finally, we want to breed the heifers to calve as 2-year-olds. So we've got to get those heifers reaching puberty at the appropriate time so that they're going to calve on time. Well, here's this example. If we get these cows to calve earlier, why do we want to front load the breeding season? Well, one is just we're going to get more revenue. If you've got a calf gaining about 2.5 pounds a day and we get an extra 21 days of growth before weaning, and I get a pretty conservative estimate in there for today's prices at $1.50 a pound, that's almost another $80 a calf, plus you get all the benefits of a uniform calf crop. So it's important to front load that breeding season just for economic reasons alone. Finally, under my reproductive goals, I want to have good performance every year, and I want to have a low risk of reproductive losses. So I want to avoid wrecks. And part of my job here, I get to work on a disease investigation unit that sort of goes out and looks at weird outbreaks of disease across Saskatchewan and sometimes in some of the other provinces. And I get to see lots of disasters, I'm afraid. And we want to avoid those. And some of the things we can do is make sure we have a good vaccination program, particularly for BVD and IPR. Using a pre-breeding modified live vaccine might be ideal, although there's other approaches. Avoiding diseases like trichomoniasis and Vibrio or Campylobacter that cause early embryonic death and infertility. And then things like biosecurity, not bringing animals in at critical time periods or isolating animals that you bring in, making sure that you bring in healthy animals if you have to buy animals into your herd, and all those important strategies to avoid bringing in disease into your herd. Nature puts some obstacles in the way, and this is one fact that I got from Dr. Larson that I think is a really important one to understand. That if you take a perfectly fertile bull and a perfectly fertile cow and you put them together when the cow's in heat and that bull breeds the cow, there's a 60 to 70% likelihood of a calf being born from a single mating. That's the best we can expect with everything working completely normally. That's just sort of nature's limits on reproductive success. And actually most of the failures, those embryos are lost at by day 14 and the cow just cycles again when expected. So 60 to 70%, that's sort of the best we can expect from one breeding of a perfectly fertile bull and a fertile cow or heifer. That's probably better than a lot of other species. It's better than people, it's better than dogs, it's better than horses. Cows are quite fertile animals, but that's the best we can do. So we've got to keep that in mind. The other obstacles we have, well, we have a gestation length of 282 days, and if we want that cow to calve at the same time every year, she's going to have to conceive within about 83 days of calving. We can't do much to change the gestation length. That's kind of fixed in stone by Mother Nature. And then we got this delay in when the cow will reach her first estrus or have her first heat cycle due to the suckling effect of the calf. And I'm not sure we completely understand that. There's probably people who understand it better than I do for sure. But we'll call this the postpartum interval, or the interval between calving and estrus, or calving and the first heat cycle. And we know that cows that have a calf suckling them don't begin estrus cycles for 50 to 60 days post-calving. Dairy cows, we take the calf away, they'll start cycling sooner, but most beef cows, on average, won't cycle till 50 or 60 days post-calving if they're in good body condition, and we'll talk more about that later. First calf heifers take longer, so they've calved calved as a first calf heifer, they're going to take 80 to 100 days to come into estrus after they've calved, so they take longer, and we'll talk more about that later as well. So those are the obstacles that Mother Nature puts in front of us. And we want to front load that breeding season so we have those cows calving early in the calving season, hopefully in the first 30 days. Then they've got at least 50 days prior to the breeding season We make sure they're in good body condition, and hopefully most of those cows are cycling at the start of the next breeding season, and they'll have at least 3 chances to get pregnant in a 63-day breeding season because they'll have 3 heat cycles. We want to make sure we use fertile bulls, and then hopefully we get a 95% pregnancy rate. So I got this little diagram just to show you how we hope things go. Here's my little 100 cow herd, my mythical herd, and they're all cycling at the start of the breeding season. I'm hoping they're going to have 3 heat cycles, and I'm assuming that I got a 60% conception rate. Remember, I said the best you could do was 60 to 70% if you took a fertile bull and a fertile cow and put them together. So I got fertile bulls, I got 100 fertile cows, they're all cycling, and I put the bulls out, and right away I'm going to get 60 pregnant in that first heat cycle because I've got fertile bulls, and I'm assuming a 60% pregnancy rate. We might actually do better. We might get 70 pregnant, but let's be conservative for now. So next heat cycle comes along. I still got fertile bulls. I got fertile cows. Now I'm going to get 84 pregnant in total, and I now only got 16 left to breed. And then the final heat cycle, I get 60% of those pregnant again, and now I'm up to just down to 6 open. So I've got almost my 95% pregnancy rate, 94% pregnant. So at the lower limit of that conservative conception rate, I can get 94% of the cows pregnant in the 3 heat cycles if they're all cycling at the start, and we've got 3 chances. So I can put it in a different sort of picture here, and this is called the calving distribution. And this is sort of the ideal distribution. We want over 60% of our cows, 65%, somewhere in that ballpark, calving in the first 20 days of the calving period. So we could all make this, for most of us, write down on a calendar or write down on a calving book when our cows calve. We could make a calving distribution that looks like this. We usually use things like 21-day periods here because that sort of shows us sort of one estrus cycle, and so we can see how many cows got bred in the first heat cycle. And the neat thing about a calving distribution, it's really the only accessible reproductive event we have in the cow. We don't usually keep track of breeding dates unless we're doing AI or other fancy things like that. The only accessible reproductive event we have in a beef cow is when she calves. But we know that if she calves on this day, she got bred approximately 282 days before that. Yeah, there's a little bit of variation around that. Some cows will keep their calves inside a little bit longer than others. But on average, we can sort of predict, well, she must have got bred about here, and then she must have come into heat about here. So we can sort of work backwards and think about all the reproductive events based on when she calves. So it's an important graph, and it's one we don't focus on very often. We often just think about pregnancy rate, and I want to focus on this a little bit more today. So these cows that calve here in that first bar, the first 21 days, they've got 60 to 82 days until the start of the breeding season. They got 80 to 100 days until the end of the first 21-day breeding period. They should all be cycling by the start of the breeding season. Those cows, if they're in good shape, they'll all be cycling by the start of the breeding season. Good chance that they'll have 3 opportunities to get bred again in the next breeding season next year. So we want to front load that breeding season. We want to try to get those cows pregnant early, so we get 60% pregnant in that first heat cycle, and we end up with our 94% pregnancy rate. In this second heat cycle, or the second bar of the calving distribution, these are the cows that have calved. They've calved in the second 21-day cycle of the calving season. They have a little less time until the start of the next breeding season. We're assuming we're breeding at the same time every year and calving at the same time. So they've only got 41 to 61 days until the start of the breeding season. They got 61 to 81 days until the end of the first breeding period. And so they got a chance of having a cycle in that first heat cycle of the breeding season next year if everything goes well, and they all should be cycling at the end of the first 21-day breeding period. So they got a pretty good chance of still getting pregnant the next year. They'll probably have 2 or 3 heat cycles at least in the next breeding season if you've got a 65-day breeding period. So those are those cows, and hopefully we get 24 of them pregnant and 16 open. These cows that calved at the end, in the third 21-day cycle, they've only got 20 to 40 days before the start of the next breeding period, which means they got 40 to 60 days until the end of the first breeding period, and they should be all cycling by the end of the second 21-day breeding period. So hopefully, if everything goes well, they'll have at least one heat cycle to have a chance of getting pregnant next year. So momentum's important, because if you start falling off the back of that calving distribution, it starts getting more and more difficult to get you pregnant in the next breeding season. Cows tend to calve in the same part of the calving season each year, and I expect we can always find exceptions to that. We can find the cow that calved last one year that calves close to the start of the calving period the next year, but on average they tend to calve approximately in the same part of the calving season each year, and to maintain that pattern we have to make sure that that interval between calving and cycling, calving and first estrus, doesn't get extended, that postpartum interval we call it. And the most important part that determines how long that postpartum interval is their body condition and nutritional status. So I want to talk about reproductive momentum in the rest of this talk and emphasize on how important that is, how important it is to keep those cows calving in the first 21 days if possible, getting pregnant in the first 21 days of the breeding season, and why it's so important to maintain nutritional status on that. But we're going to take a little break here. Tracy's going to ask you a few poll questions. So this is the audience participation part. Tracy, I'll let you put the poll questions up, and you should be able to click there on your screen and give your choice of the answer. We're going to see what our audience thinks of a few of these questions.
Okay, there you go. First question. Do you feel that the reproductive performance of your cow herd has declined over the past 10 years? Again, these are anonymous. We can't attribute your answers to any of you, but certainly interested to hear what you think. So I'll give you about 5 more seconds here to click on your answer. Okay, there we go. So about 75% of you answered no, 18 yes, and 6% unsure. Next question, which of the following time periods most closely fits with your calving season? January to February, February, March, March, April, April, May, or May or later? I can see there's a lot more answers coming in this time around. Okay, I'll give you a couple more seconds here. And there we go. The majority of you answered March through April at 24%. Oh, sorry, 36% was April through May. So a lot of you have yet to start your calving seasons. Next question. Do you regularly body condition score your cows? You can select all of those that apply, where they're usually just by eyeball when you're doing your chores. You do a true body condition score at pregnancy testing or weaning, at calving, or at some other time. A couple more seconds here to get your answers in. Uh, 81% only by eyeball when doing chores, 16% yes at pregnancy testing or weaning, 10% at calving, and 14% at some other time. And last question. Do you test your winter feed? A couple more seconds here. 40% of you answered no, 33% yes, and 27% said occasionally.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. So I want to go back to this reproductive momentum thing, but as we think about that, you know, there's really only two things that have to happen for a cow to get pregnant, but we forget about one of them. First of all, the cow has to have a heat cycle. She has to be in estrus, and then she has to conceive and be bred by a fertile bull. And I know my students and I think some veterinarians and producers, as soon as we have a reproductive problem, they tend to blame the bull. We want to see, well, what's wrong with their bulls? Must be a problem with their bull. But in my experience, many of the outbreaks I go to that have a significant reproductive loss, it's because the cows haven't been cycling. There are other reasons, obviously, for reproductive loss, but it's certainly an important one that we sometimes ignore. You know, we can have lots of other major categories of risk factors for poor conception rates. So infertile bulls and injuries to bulls, not enough bulls, not having the appropriate bull-cow ratio, nutritional problems, and we're going to talk more about those, cows not coming into heat. And then obviously the infectious diseases where we fail to maintain pregnancy, either with early embryonic death, with some of the sexually transmitted diseases like trichomoniasis or Vibrio or Campylobacter as we call it now, or some of the viruses like bovine virus diarrhea or infectious bovine rhinotracheitis virus, things that we can vaccinate for fairly efficiently, or parasites like Neospora that can cause abortion as well. So there's lots of causes of infectious loss of disease, and certainly we have to pay attention to biosecurity and vaccination programs so that we don't have those come and create a problem with our fertility of our herd. This screen is just an example of how I like to have our students think about herd fertility in cow-calf herds, and there's really two components to it. One is this percentage of the females cycling on the top half here of the screen, and the other factor is the conception rates. And then it's got a whole list of all the different things that we've kind of talked about here in general that can affect those things and can cause problems in general with herd fertility. And if you look at this side, percentage of the females cycling up here, you can see that a lot of the things that affect that are nutritional, things like body condition, winter feeding, maybe parasites, which can affect your nutritional status, the postpartum energy you're fed after calving, the breeding schedule can certainly have a component to that as well. And then conception rates can be affected by things like bull performance and reproductive tract infections, and nutritional deficiencies can play a role there, and AI programs, et cetera, and plus all this, the heifer rearing programs and sire selection and dystocia management, all those sort of things, calving difficulties, they all play a role on both sides of this equation. But if you look overall, nutrition is a major category here on both sides of this equation, and can have a major role. Those things that affect body condition or specific nutritional deficiencies can have a major effect on herd fertility. So it's a really important aspect of maintaining herd fertility in the cow-calf herd. So I want to talk a little bit about body condition scores and how that works. And body condition scoring, I think, is something that's a very simple procedure. We don't tend to do it very often. Most of us just tend to eyeball the cows, and we can learn a lot by putting our hands on them and actually doing body condition scoring when we're handling those cows at pregnancy checking time or at vaccination time or something like that, and actually sorting out where they are and what their body condition score is. So it's something, we got lots of fact sheets on it. There's lots of information out there about body condition scoring, and it's something I'd really encourage you to take a look at. We've done quite a few projects on fertility, and one project that we did was at the Excel Community Pasture here in southern Saskatchewan, and that pasture was the first pasture where we identified trichomoniasis in Canada. And as we were doing that project, we brought all those cows in, and we measured them this way and that way when they went onto the pasture, and measured them this way and that way when they went off, because we really weren't quite sure what the problem was when we started, and we eventually found trichomoniasis. But we also could show, despite there being an infectious disease in that pasture causing the problems, that we could also show that cows with a body condition score of 2.5 or greater as they went on to the pasture were twice as likely to be pregnant at the end of the breeding season when we brought those cows off pasture. And that cows that had above average weight gains while they were on pasture were also twice as likely to be pregnant. So even despite having trich there and having all the issues with that, nutrition was still important. We could show that very easily in that study. This is a study that one of my colleagues did here at WCVM, Cheryl Waldner, and a grad student, Alvaro Garcia-Guerra, just published this paper on herd management and reproductive history events. And in that paper, they showed that the body condition score of the cows at pregnancy testing time was most strongly associated with pregnancy status. And it's the easiest time to measure them. We got them in the chute for pregnancy testing anyway. And they could show easily that cows with a body condition score of less than 5 out of 9, they used a 9-point scale instead of the 5-point scale, they were less likely to be pregnant than those that had a body condition score of 5 or greater. And cows at less than 6 were also more likely to abort. So there was this linkage even between body condition score and abortion, that if you had a lower body condition score, you were even more likely to abort. And we usually associate abortion just with infectious disease often, but we could show that, well, they're more likely to abort even if they're in lower body condition score. And a 6, that's still a pretty reasonable body condition score. So that's a pretty amazing association. Very interesting study. So we'd like those cows to be an adequate body condition score at the start of the breeding season, because we can show that body condition score as they enter the breeding season is so important to their reproductive status and their opportunity to get pregnant. We'd like them to have a minimum body condition score of at least 2.5 on the 5-point scale at the beginning of the breeding season. And that may require us to sort these cows out in the previous fall at weaning time to adjust their body condition scores before calving. Once they're lactating, once they've calved, they got a calf at foot, and they're lactating, having that nursing calf, it makes it very, very difficult for that cow to catch up their body condition score after calving. We have to feed them so much then. It's far better to do it prior to calving if possible. And cows in poor body condition, this is what I want to spend the next few minutes on, they're going to have a delay in returning to estrus, or they may not cycle at all. That body condition score has a huge impact on that postpartum interval, or that timing interval between calving and first heat cycle, first estrus. This is data from a very old study by J. Wiltbank, and it was published many years ago, but he just had 3 groups of cows. Cows that were thin at calving, he called them moderate body condition scored cows, and then good body condition scored cows. So you can see this herd was probably not the best managed herd. He had 272 thin cows, then he had a bunch of moderate ones and a few good body condition scores. And what the numbers there underneath the days after calving show you is the percentage of cows that come into heat after calving. So you can see at 40 days after calving, I'm not sure you can see my mouse or not, but at 40 days after calving, those cows, I'll just do the highlighter here. So 19% of those cows come into heat by 40 days after calving. That's the thin cows. And 31% of the good conditioned cows are in heat by 40 days after calving. So not very many in any group. But let's go out here to 70 or 80 days. Remember, we wanted these cows to get bred about 80 to 90 days after calving. Let's look at this. At 80 days after calving, only 62% of those thin cows are in heat, whereas virtually all, 98% of the good body conditioned cows are in heat at 80 days after calving. So he just took 3 groups of cows, thin, moderate, and good, and he said, well, how long does it take them to come into the heat? And even out here at 100 days after calving, we can see that 100% of the moderate cows are in heat, 100% of the good body conditioned cows are in heat, but only 70% of those thin cows have even started cycling by day 100 after the calving season. Very difficult for them to get back on track and start cycling. We'll see if I can change my, okay. So looks like my little numbers still show up there. But anyway, I've got a little graph here still that just takes that data and puts it in a graphic form. So here, this bottom line is the thin cows. It shows the percentage cycling on the left axis here, and you can see that even at 120 days, only about 80% of those thin cows are cycling, and then the moderate cows are the yellow line, and then the very top line are the cows in good body condition. So I've just taken the same graph and or same data and put it into a graphic form. So let's look at the cows that calve in the first 21 days of the heat cycle. This is where they're going to be when estrus comes around at the first breeding period next year, when you put the bulls in after they've calved. So they've calved in the first 21 days, and now this is where they stand right there. So you can see that the moderate and the good condition cows, virtually all of them are cycling by the start of that first 21 days of the breeding season. And certainly by the end, even the moderate condition cows, almost all of them are cycling. But only about 2/3 or less of those thin cows are cycling then. If we look at the cows that calve in day 22 to 42, this is where they'll end up at the start of the breeding season. And you can see, yeah, by the end of it, most of those cows are cycling if they're in good body condition. But if they're in poor body condition, boy, not even half of those cows hardly are cycling by the end of that breeding period. And then finally, here's where the breeding season would fall for those cows that are calving in the last 21 days. You can see that it's very tough for those cows to get bred unless they're in very good body condition. So it makes it much more difficult for those cows to catch up. So the calving distribution is important. Cows tend to calve in the same part of the calving season each year. That reproductive momentum, we have to establish that and keep those cows calving early so that they're cycling early and they're calving earlier again. And the calving early makes a big difference in terms of economics. We get more pounds on our calves. We're going to have more money in our pockets at the end of the thing. So replacements, heifers, first calf heifers, they've got to be in the first period or earlier. I used to say this was, yeah, that's a good idea. We should have heifers calving early or calving before the cows. But those heifers take they only have 62 to 82 days till the start of the first breeding season. And remember, none of those perfectly good fertile heifers will even be cycling by the start of the next breeding season. They have a much longer postpartum interval of 100 days. So those perfectly good fertile heifers, if they calve in the first 21 days, none of them are going to be cycling by the start of the next breeding period. So heifers are important in improving productivity. We want to establish their reproductive momentum. We want to get them off on the right track, and we want to start them calving early so that in the next years and years after, they're going to calve early as well. And in order to conceive early, heifers have to reach puberty prior to the start of the breeding season. We're establishing their reproductive momentum. But remember, for those first calf heifers, the time from calving to cycling, on average, in heifers that are good, fertile, good body condition, is going to take 80 to 100 days. And in order for those first calf heifers to be cycling at the start of the next breeding season, they probably need to calve at least 0 to 20 days ahead of the cows. And probably we should start our breeding season for heifers 30 to 42 days before the cows to give them a fighting chance to calve in that first 21 days in the next calving season. So we got to have those heifers cycling by 12 to 13 and a half months of age. So we got to have them born in the first 42 days of the breeding season as calves. We want to probably select our replacements from those calves that are born in the first 2 heat cycles. We know that the mean age of puberty for heifers is somewhere around 11.5 to 14 months. So, you know, I used to think that's a good idea. Yeah, it'd probably be better to calve the heifers first for a number of reasons. But really, to establish a reproductive momentum, it's absolutely vital. We really have to do that. So, if you want momentum on your side, you have to breed those heifers for at least 30 days prior to the cow herd. Gives them a fighting chance to get pregnant in the first 21 days of the next breeding season. And in order to be cycling as replacements, these heifers probably need to be chosen from the early calving cows. You need that reproductive momentum. It's especially important in the heifers, or you're going to start them out behind the 8 ball right away, because the second calvers are going to be calving late in the calving season. And there's no doubt in many herds we go to, we see lots of second calvers that fall out of the herd. They're open because they didn't get their reproductive momentum established on the right way, on the right foot. So I hope this reproductive math hasn't put you to sleep. I wanted to show you that there's not a lot of room for error in the reproductive math. Any sort of other little thing that's going to delay that postpartum interval is going to start causing you problems. It's going to start dropping animals down that reproductive momentum chain, down the calving distribution later and later as time goes on. And I've seen that in a number of outbreaks where we didn't have a reproductive wreck all at once, whereas it sort of gradually happened. Yeah, they got behind, and they got behind a bit more, and they got behind a bit more, but the pregnancy rates were still okay, and they got behind a bit more, and then all of a sudden, oh man, we got way too many open. Yeah, it's been going on for 4 years. It didn't happen overnight, and it was a gradual decline. You didn't see it in pregnancy rates, but you could see it in the calving distribution. So things like poor body condition scores, heifers being born late, heifers or cows in poor body condition, mineral deficiencies, things like that, they can delay that postpartum interval and start to impact our reproductive momentum. Once you get behind, it takes years to catch up again. It's very, very difficult to move that cow that calves at the end of the calving distribution up to the first 21 days again. It does happen, but it's hard to do, I think. Once you get behind, it can take years to catch up. Obviously, we don't want the major wrecks by not vaccinating or having poor biosecurity or infertile bulls or trick or something like that in our herd. Those are obvious disasters we want to avoid. We want to make sure we do the appropriate things to avoid those. So I've been talking for a long while here. I'm going to finish up fairly quickly. But the last thing I want to talk about is, well, so what? Campbell, you're full of it. My calving distribution isn't perfect, but I'm doing okay. And I've got lots of clients that look like this, that, they have a little longer breeding season, and they certainly don't have 60% calving in the first 21 days. They only have 21% in this example. And the second 21 days, they have 25%, and then 16 and 16, and then 10%. And they got about 13% open. Yeah, that's a little higher than they wanted. They usually like to be closer to 90. But they have an 87% pregnancy rate. Well, yeah, that's okay, isn't it? It's not terrible. But let's just focus on the pounds of calf that we've lost here. And remember, we use that calf gaining 2.5 pounds a day, and you get 21 days, you're going to get an extra $80 calf out of that. If we apply that to this calving distribution that we just talked about, we're losing about $127 a calf in this herd, or about $38,000 if we had a 300 cow herd, or you can do the math for whatever size cow herd you had, if we could move that to a more ideal calving distribution. That's a pretty nice Christmas party, 38,000 bucks, a lot of money being left on the table there, and that's sort of with fairly conservative pounds of calf numbers and calf prices. So yeah, we tend to focus on pregnancy rate. It's easy to focus on. We can sort that out fairly quickly. But we probably should be looking at that calving distribution a little closer and seeing, hey, is our reproductive momentum going the right direction? How's that working? So I got a few take-home messages. I think reproduction is the most important productivity measurement that affects profitability. We still have to worry about costs. We can't sort of inflate costs at all expenses just to maximize reproduction. So costs are still important, and we have to think about those. But we know that even average reproductive performance can cost us significant money. And so it's probably important to not sacrifice reproduction too much when we're reducing our cow costs. So we don't want to sacrifice that reproductive success. And that reproductive momentum is important, that as those cows drift down that calving distribution, it gets them very hard to catch up. So we want to make sure our cows in good body condition scores at calving. I think you should consider body condition scoring as part of your normal management practice, and probably you should consider doing a calving distribution every year. It's a very simple thing to do if you record calving dates or if you mark down how many calves you have on the calendar. You don't even need individual identification to figure that out. We probably need to sort cows into management groups for winter feeding and consider analyzing our feed to make sure we're utilizing our feed in the best way possible when feeding our cows. And if we use extended grazing, which certainly is one way of lowering costs, we need to make sure we continue to monitor the body condition scores of those cows during this time period so that they don't start to fall behind. Make sure, obviously, we have access to salt and trace mineral as part of the feeding period. Want to make sure we give our heifers reproductive momentum, and I think we should select those heifers from the early calving cows, and I think most producers do that. But then I think the other thing we need to really seriously consider is breeding those heifers 30 to 42 days ahead of the cow herd so that they establish their momentum right off the bat and they don't start falling behind the rest of the herd as first calvers. Obviously, that means monitoring your heifer management program and doing all the things that we do with our heifers, body condition scoring them and replacement heifer nutrition and weighing your heifers for target weights, making sure that they hit about 65% of the mature weight of the cow herd by breeding and about 85% by calving. We might even do pre-breeding palpations to identify non-cycling heifers to help with our selection process. And obviously estrus synchronization has a place in some herds as well as vaccination programs obviously in most herds. And then we want to avoid the reproductive wrecks. We want to practice good biosecurity, maintain our vaccination programs, make sure we're using fertile bulls and doing all those things appropriately. So that's all I've got for you tonight. I'll turn it back to Tracy and we'll try to answer questions, and I'll see if I can't clear this junk off my screen now. Thanks.
That was great, John. Thank you so much. Okay, so of course now we'll open it up for questions. We've had, let me see here, about 11 great questions come in already. The first one is, how much more accurate is body condition scoring than eyeballing?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think you know, we can probably eyeball animals and get a reasonable idea, but boy, when that winter hair coat gets on, it's sometimes you got to put your hands on them to really identify that. And I don't know, I think that would be an interesting study to do, is to do a bit more research on how can we eyeball them accurately enough to identify that. I don't know if that's ever been done. Certainly we know most people, when they suggest body condition scoring, they're saying put your hands on them. And it probably depends a little bit on the breed and the hair coat and things like that. And I know some herds where the hair coat gets pretty thick and long in the winter time, and it's pretty tough to do by just eyeballing them. You probably have to put your hands on them.
Okay. Next question is for you to please repeat the optimum times to body condition score.
Yeah, so Dr. Waldner's study said that the optimal time was probably at pregnancy checking time. Now, obviously, it's too late to do anything for that pregnancy. That pregnancy's already been established, so you're worrying about the next breeding period. You're sort of trying to get them set up for the next breeding season. And so she showed that that was the one that was most closely associated with pregnancy status and most closely associated with how they were going to do in the next time period. So it's usually a time we're handling cows, but I think you could do it at a number of times through the year and it's still of value. It's just very hard to have those cows catch up if you notice a problem at calving time because they're often lactating, and then you've got to feed them so much to get them caught up. It's very difficult.
Next question is, how does body condition scoring on a 5-point scale translate to the 10-point scale?
Yeah, just multiply by 2 and it's about the same thing, right? So if they're a 6 on a 9 or 10-point scale, they're about a 3 on the 5-point scale, approximately.
If cow's condition is improving after calving, will she not cycle in a timely manner for breeding?
Oh, that's a very good question, and there's some fairly good evidence to show that if cows are in an increasing plane of nutrition, or they're gaining weight, that they're more likely to get pregnant. So if your cows are too thin, if something's happened during the winter and body condition hasn't come out quite as well as you had hoped, one of the old strategies for fixing that used to be called flushing, and it just means sort of giving the cows the best feed as they approach the breeding season, or trying to improve their body condition as they approach the breeding season, having them on an inclining plane of nutrition, and there's fairly good evidence that that will help those cows to some extent. So that's sort of the other aspect to it. If we just sort of take away body condition score a little bit, we know that an inclining plane of nutrition does help.
Can you fix the body condition with good feed after calving?
Yeah, you can, but it's tougher, and you're going to spend a lot more money doing it, right? Because those cows are lactating, so they got such a huge increase in their energy demands. So you can do it, but it is a lot tougher and it's more expensive. And I guess that's why we would suggest doing it at pregnancy checking time, so you have some time to correct it before calving.
Okay, next question. Any recommended procedures on synchronizing cows before breeding?
Boy, that's a tough one, and that really varies by the herd and by economics and your management system, and it's one that you probably need to consult with your veterinarian. We got some great people here that have done a lot of research on estrus synchronization, and that's probably a whole other topic and a whole other talk. So I probably can't answer that one tonight very easily. There's certainly people out there in your community, in the veterinary community for sure, that can probably help you with that.
Okay, next question. On a 50-day season, what percentage should we expect to be pregnant?
Well, on a 50-day season, if you've only that's a little less. That's 2.5 heat cycles. We're probably shooting for a slightly lower pregnancy percentage than 95%. We'd probably be happier with close to 90 or 88% or something like that. That's probably a more realistic goal in those ones. I don't know. I'd have to do the math on that to sort that out exactly. But we could sort that out, and I think it would be in the neighborhood of the 90 to 88%. But certainly, I tell the students when we go do an outbreak and we look at the pregnancy percentage as the first outcome of fertility, what's the first question you ask? Well, the first question you ask is how long is the breeding period, because that has a major impact on the pregnancy percentage. If I have my bulls in with the cows for 120 days or 150 days, I better have just about everybody pregnant. There's no excuse for that. But if I have a 65-day breeding season, well, probably the best I can expect is 95%, and although we do get higher than that, certainly with 65 days, but that's a more realistic goal. And then if it's only a 50-day one, then yeah, we would expect a slightly lower pregnancy rate again. So the breeding period is a very important factor in determining the pregnancy percentage. But I guess I want you to focus on, we always focus on pregnancy percentage. We talk about that all the time, right? And we rarely focus on how many cows are calving in that first 21 days of the calving season. So I want to focus on both the pregnancy percentage, yeah, that's important, but I also want to focus on how many cows are we getting pregnant in the first 21 days.
Okay, there's a pile of more questions coming in, so this is great. One for Reynold here. How do we know how much longer the science clusters will last?
Reynold, your microphone's not on.
How's that?
There you go.
Oh, good. Yeah, so the current science cluster goes from 2013 through 2018. It ends then. We don't know if there will be another one. I think if the reason there was a second one was because the first one was a success. I think if we continue to show that we're making progress and that there's benefits to funding science and doing it this way, we have a good chance of making a really strong case that there should be another science cluster or some version of it next time.
Great. Okay, so for you, John, what effect, if any, will crossbreeding have on conception rates?
Well, it'll probably improve them. We know that crossbreeding, I mean, it improves just about everything. It improves calf survival, it improves weaning weights, it improves everything. It's the ultimate genetic manipulator at the end of the day. So it will probably improve conception rates to some degree. How much it will do that, I'm not sure, but it probably helps to some degree. Doesn't help if the cows aren't cycling though, right? The two factors, the cow has to cycle and then the bull has to be fertile, and then if the cow's not cycling, it doesn't matter what breed the bull is. So you got to have those cows cycling first.
Okay, what does a mineral program geared towards boosting reproduction rates look like?
Oh boy, that's going to really depend on where you live and what feeds you're feeding, and I guess that's the big thing is I don't think you can plan a mineral panel without analyzing plan your minerals without analyzing your winter feed and looking at that sort of stuff. And in fact, in some places maybe we should be doing more sampling of the cows and looking at their micromineral status with panels to see if they're copper deficient or have issues like that. So I know in Saskatchewan we have, and in parts of Alberta too, we have a lot of copper deficiency here. It's very, very common deficiency that we see in our cows. It can certainly impact when heat cycles and cycling and things like that, but that's going to be really dependent on your specific herd and your specific situation. Maybe Reynold has a comment on that. No, Mike again, Reynold.
No, I think you've covered it very well.
Okay, how do you determine the first 30 days of calving? Bull dates or from the day the first calf is born?
Yeah, I'd probably go on bull dates, or when you'd sort of normally expect you put the bulls in on this date and then calculate 282 days out from there. I would sort of say that's the first day of calving, or the first day I get a calf after that would be my first day of calving. Certainly we'll get some cows that are going to have premature calves or calve earlier, or maybe they got bred by the neighbor's bull or something like that. So you don't want to count those as the first day of calving if that happens.
Okay, we bred at 2 years plus. How does that affect need to breed the heifers 30 days ahead of the herd?
It probably makes it a little less important, but it's still, they're going to have a longer postpartum interval as first calvers, and it's just, they won't have quite the same nutritional demands on them because they'll have grown up a little bit more. But it's still going to have, they're still going to have a longer postpartum interval as a first calver, and it's just part of Mother Nature. It's not all partly due to being a heifer, it's partly due to having your first calf. So you'll see that delay even in heifers that are a little bit older. It'll be less, but it'll still be there. So you might be able to get away with not breeding them quite as far ahead, but you still probably should be breeding them earlier.
Should a heifer's first calf be weaned earlier to give her a chance to regain body condition before the winter?
Yeah, I mean, it's one method of trying to do that, but you're sacrificing productivity of the calf as well, right? So that becomes an economic question of what's the best way of doing that. Certainly, though, if your heifers look like they've, maybe the past year it was drought limited or something like that, that may be a key management strategy to help them regain body condition before the next calving season, and it'll certainly can help that, and it's probably a decision based on feed resources you have and things like that as well.
Okay, so breeding heifers 42 days ahead of the cows also extends my calving season by approximately 42 days. Would I not be better to have additional condition on the heifers so they can keep up with the cows and remain with the lighter calving season, with a tighter calving?
Yeah, and I get that. That's the downside of having those heifers calve ahead. For sure, at the very least, I would say, if you say, well, gee, I just don't want to extend my calving season that long. I don't want to start calving the heifers earlier. That's too much labor, and I get that. Then you really need to push your heifers to calve in that first 21 days at the very minimum, because they're going to start falling behind. There's nothing you can do about that. Having them in good body condition will help, right, and making sure that that'll help. But even heifers in good body condition take 80 to 100 days to cycle again after they've calved for the first time. So even if they're in if they're in poor body condition, then it's worse. So the best they can do is around 80 to 100 days after they calve for that postpartum interval. So yeah, I get that. That's the downside of having them calve first. On the other side of the equation, you get your heifers calving first. They're the ones you usually have to worry about. They're calving on the cleanest calving grounds. You can focus your attentions on them at that time, and you're not having to worry about cows calving at the same time as the heifers. But yeah, I get that. That's the downside, and that's usually the argument against it. And I understand that. But when you do the math, boy, it's hard to get away from the fact that that they're going to be at a disadvantage down the road. And you will probably, in most herds, when we look at the open cows, yeah, there's some of the old cows are open and things like that that don't get pregnant. But there's usually a good proportion of those those first calvers that were going to be second calvers now that are open in most herds when you look at the open cows, even in well-managed herds.
Do heavy milking cows on average have a more difficult time maintaining body condition relative to moderate milking cows?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we know that they got higher energy demands, and so they're going to need more feed, and there's no doubt about that. And bigger cows too, right? Bigger cows have higher energy demands. When we did that community pasture study, we did things like measuring how tall the cows were, and we could show that that was related to how well they gained weight while they were on pasture, and so it had an impact on reproduction too.
Okay. If a cow has a good body condition score and the bull ratio is adequate, why keep bulls in longer than 60 days?
Yep, good question. Why would you? Lots of producers do, just because they don't want to pull the bulls, and then they use pregnancy checking time to sort out who is going to calve in the right time period for them. But no, I think that's a good question. That if you have cows in good body condition score, you have fertile bulls and a good bull-to-cow ratio, you don't need bulls in there for longer than 60 days. And then you have a nice tight calving pattern, and you have a nice even calf crop. Lots of advantages.
If running British and exotic breeds, should we breed the longer gestation exotic breeds earlier?
Yeah, probably. If you want to, they're going to have a longer gestation period, so you sort of put them behind the 8 ball. It's kind of like the heifers in a way. And also they probably have, hopefully you're feeding them differently, or you have the ability to make sure they maintain their body condition score as well as the British breeds. So it would probably help. Again, the downside is, do you want to extend the calving season? That's a little bit of the downside, but yeah, it would probably make some sense to do that. The gestation period isn't a huge difference though between those breeds. It's a slight one, but it would probably make a little bit of sense if you could start the breeding season earlier for them.
Okay, maybe we'll ask a couple more questions and then we'll wrap things up. If your cows have a low body condition score, are they most in need of energy or protein?
Oh boy, lots of good questions. Again, maybe Reynold wants to chime in on this one, but again, probably the most common thing we see is energy, but it can be protein as well. We'll see both, and I've seen both situations. Again, it really depends on the individual circumstances. Reynold?
Yeah, the only thing I would contribute to that is I would say it's likely energy, and also supplementing energy is an awful lot cheaper way to, or supplementing just with barley is an awful lot cheaper to get energy into a cow than a protein tub.
Yeah, good point.
Mm-hmm. Could you comment on calving heifers as 3-year-olds? We all know the disadvantages, but are there advantages?
Well, I think the advantage is that postpartum interval as a second calver is not as lengthened as the ones that we calve as 2-year-olds, and so somebody asked a similar question to that, and I think that is the one advantage, is that that their postpartum interval will be a little less lengthened as a calving as a 3-year-old than a 2-year-old. The downside is that their reproductive lifetime is shortened, right? And so you're probably going to get fewer calves out of them in their reproductive lifetime, in theory. I'm not sure we've studied that immensely, but most people would suggest that it's more cost efficient to have them calve as 2-year-olds.
Great. Okay, I think we'll leave that as the last question for tonight so we can wrap things up. I apologize, there are still a few more there. If you do have burning questions, of course, you can contact us. You can find John on Twitter and, of course, email us, and we'll get those back to you. If you'd like to hear more from the BCRC, of course, including future webinars, be sure to sign up to our email list. You can do that by going to our website, which is beefresearch.ca, and looking for that subscribe button. If you're on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, you can find us and follow us there. And I'd also encourage you to visit the Canadian Cattlemen's Association website, which is www.cattle.ca, and you can sign up to their newsletter called Action News. A very big thank you to Dr. Bergen and Dr. Campbell for volunteering your time and expertise here tonight, and thanks to each of you in the audience for joining us. In a couple of days, you'll receive a link to a survey which will ask you what you thought of tonight's webinar and what you're most interested in seeing for future webinars. The next webinar topic is up to you, so please do complete that survey. We need your feedback to do the best job we can to deliver information to you that's as useful and meaningful as possible for you, and that really helps you to make informed decisions on what's best for your herd and your land and ultimately your bottom line. So please do complete that survey, and don't hesitate to contact us here at the Beef Cattle Research Council with any questions or comments you have at any time. Again, you'll also receive an email from me in a couple of days with the link if you want to watch this recording again, as well as some additional information on related to boosting your reproduction in your herd. So that's it. Thanks again for your interest, and good night, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Tracy and John.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, good night.